This exercise is probably one of the best ways to really explore and discover beautiful jazz harmony and chord voicings. And it's one of my favorite things to do, but I don't really work on it that often. In fact, there are a few weird things about this way of practicing. It's amazing for learning harmony and voicings. It's also incredible for developing your fretboard overview. But if you do it while you're comping in a band, you should be fired. At least I would probably fire you.
You're fired!
I picked up this way of working from going to the Barry Harris piano workshops even before I started studying at the conservatory in The Hague. And it is also really fun to do with others if you're hanging out and playing songs, just to really dig into what is possible and find some of the most beautiful details and tricks with the harmony. This is going to get a bit nerdy with the chords, but I think you'll find that it's worth it. Now, there is a problem with the way that we practice and look at chords, mainly because too much of it is about reducing things to exercises and systems with lots of inversions. Obviously, exercises like these are not useless, but in the same way that only practicing scales and arpeggios won't help you play great solos, then just playing a bunch of inversions or exercises doesn't mean that you can magically make the chords of a song sound amazing. And often we don't get much further than just using stuff on a 2-5-1 progression, which is fine, but there's a lot more happening in jazz harmony than just 2-5-1 progressions. So that's nowhere near enough. The first time I came across this exercise or this way of working was in the Barry Harris workshops. And going to those workshops in The Hague before I started studying there really changed my life. There were two things that were really important about that. At the time, I was living in Copenhagen, practicing a lot, trying to learn, playing in the street and a few small gigs. And I really wanted to learn bebop. So when I heard about this workshop at the Royal Conservatory in The Hague, then of course that was something I wanted to attend and check out. One of the things that changed everything was how and what Barry taught us, which I've talked about many times. But the other aspect was probably just as important. I just never really thought about it until I started working on this video. And I will return to why that might be something you definitely want to keep in mind. This wasn't in the large soloing masterclasses, but more in all the piano workshops in the evening, which were a lot smaller, in smaller rooms, and we were all smoking like crazy because that was still a thing back then. Now, in those workshops, the topic was mostly specific songs and how to harmonize them, what you can do with the chords, and it wasn't a lecture or a lesson. It was much more of an exchange of ideas and exploring the material together. The first year I was there, I couldn't follow almost anything of what was going on because I didn't know a lot of theory and I hardly knew any of the songs that they were talking about. But the attitude of exchanging ideas and really exploring the songs together was really inspiring. And that made me realize that I definitely needed to be in a place with more people who were exploring jazz like this. And I probably just found the perfect place to go for that. The goal here is to really dig into the harmony and find some great ways to connect the chords and make it all sound beautiful. So I'm going to focus on a song that's not just a series of 2/5s. And I think It Could Happen to You is a good example of a song like that. Later, I'll get into why this way of working can, maybe should, also get you thrown out of a band.
You're fired!
For the first 5 bars, you could play these chords. Maybe let's start with just the basic shell voicings. Just to have a little bit more to work with, I'm going to expand this into drop 2 voicings and pay attention to how these chords are very much connected in a flow. Like this, the basic chords are already flowing, but instead of just playing them in time and leaving it at that, then let me show you how if you go over this rubato and start exploring it a bit, then you can find some stuff that sounds amazing and is actually also pretty playable for this chord progression. Now, the first chord change is E flat major 7 to E diminished. And here an easy way to add a bit more movement is to first have the major 7 go down to the major 6 and then to the diminished chord. You can really look at this as a chromatic enclosure in the middle of the chord. But of course you can do a lot of other stuff, and that is exactly what I want you to explore and discover. For instance, you can use more voices as a way to move to the E diminished. Now this one doesn't really work with the song here, but I'll tell you why I think that is in a bit. When we're just listening to it like this, then it sounds fine, but I think in this case the melody is a B flat, and that kind of clashes with that suspension, so that doesn't work that well. But it might sound great in another song. As you can see in the sheet music, then I'm not naming the passing chord, and that is because I don't really think of it as an independent chord. I don't think that really makes a lot of sense. It's just voice leading and more sort of horizontal movement than a chord symbol. And here's a way that you can use the wrong notes to add a bit of counter movement and a suspension when you're going from E diminished to F minor 7. I'm sure you would agree that usually A flat is a less than fantastic note on an E diminished chord, but in this case, it works really well. And what I'm doing here is that I'm just moving the two top voices. One moves up and the other one moves down. Of course, you can also do great things with adding chords and using substitutions, but this way of really getting into the song opens up for a lot of options. And if you're starting with a different chord or a different place on the neck, then you might find some very different but still practical sounds. As you can see, then you can do really a lot with the chords, and you don't have to try to name everything with a chord symbol that has to make sense in a chord progression or follow some sort of rule. It's really just about what sounds nice, and you're opening up what you can do with the harmony. And what you're doing here is developing your fretboard overview by seeing the voicing in the scale on the fretboard and then using that to create movement and connect to the next chord. If we move on in the chord progression from F minor 7 to F sharp diminished, then on this diminished chord you can use a simpler version of the same type of suspension and also add a little melody on the F minor 7. As you can tell, then this type of exercise works amazingly well as a type of conversation. So if you're hanging out with somebody, exploring a song, then you can go over how you play it and inspire each other, exchange ideas and get some new, fresh input on how to interpret a song. And this is definitely something that's going to help you progress and boost your playing. It can be difficult to do that in person because of all sorts of reasons, but if you're looking to connect with people that are also interested in jazz, then maybe check out my Facebook group, the Jazz Guitar Insiders. I'm sure that you don't want to get fired from the band that you're playing in, and if you work enough on stuff like this, then you can learn to do some of it in real time while you're playing. But the reason why I say that this exercise will get you fired is that I have actually seen both guitar players and piano players be very busy with the chords in this way, and in doing so, completely fail to be a part of the music. And this is for practice, not something you want to distract you when you're trying to play with other people. So work through stuff, rubato, and make sure to be in the band when you're playing. What really helps developing this is having a good overview of the chords and not being stuck with static grips. Instead, you want to have a more flexible way of understanding the chords, and you can check out how to develop that in this video.